The restaurant hummed with soft light and practiced laughter. Forks touched plates like gentle clocks. In the corner, a young woman sat alone. Hands folded, eyes fixed on the man across from her. He looked down at his phone instead of her hands. Every word she signed dissolved against his indifference. When he stood to leave, she didn't chase. She only exhaled quietly, as if used to it. 2 tables away, Daniel watched. His son played with crayons beside him. He knew that silence, the one people mistake for weakness. And before he could talk himself out of it, his fingers began to move, not to comfort, but to tell her what she'd never been told aloud. It begins on an ordinary evening in a downtown restaurant washed with amber light. Daniel, a single father in his 40s, sits with his young son, eating quietly. The camera holds on the quiet rituals. Napkin folds, soft clinking, a child tracing circles in condensation. At the next table sits Mara, early 30s, deaf since birth. She signs slowly, patiently, as the man across from her avoids her eyes. His lips move fast, her world slower. The disconnect between them is not cruel, it's casual, the kind that leaves bruises without intention. When he leaves, the room returns to its normal rhythm, but she doesn't. She stays still, tracing words on the tablecloth. Pretending to finish her drink, Daniel watches, not out of pity, but recognition. There's a language in being unseen. This first chapter sets the tone. Empathy without rescue. Pain without spectacle. It's about how silence becomes both a boundary and a bridge. Chapter breakdown, structure overview, the soundless table. The moment of rejection, Daniel observes, the inciting gesture. He signs to her, "You deserve better." Contrast lives. Their worlds intersect. Her independence meets his restraint. Empathy, rising. Shared silence reveals mutual loneliness. Emotional revelation. A confession without words changes both. Quiet resolution. Not romance, but respect. 2 lives aligned in decency. The restaurant's hum was low, polite, almost too even, like a song that forgot it once had words. Soft jazz trembled faintly through the air, and the smell of grilled rosemary filled the room. Daniel sat near the window, a small table set for 2. His son Liam was colouring in the corner of a children's menu, tongue caught between his teeth, a habit he'd inherited from his late mother. Daniel wasn't there for conversation. He rarely was anymore. Dinner out was his way of giving Liam the illusion of normal. 2 plates, 2 chairs, 2 quiet presences that looked like a family, even if the 3rd seat stayed empty. At the other end of the room, near the column where the light broke into gold fragments, sat a young woman alone. Her name was Mara. The man across from her scrolled on his phone, half listening as she moved her hands. Her fingers spoke in delicate rhythm, precise, practiced, filled with patience. He didn't look up. The waiter came and went. Water was poured. The conversation, one-sided, faltered. From Daniel's table, it looked like a dance missing one partner. Liam noticed first. "She's talking with her hands," Daniel nodded. "She's signing, like sign language." "Yes." The boy tilted his head. "But he's not watching." Daniel's fork paused mid-air. He didn't answer. Across the room, the man's lips moved quickly, a smile that never reached his eyes. He tapped his napkin twice, said something Mara couldn't hear, and stood. She reached for her bag, but he raised a hand. "Stay seated." Then he left, no scene, no raised voices, just absence. Mara stayed there, still holding the shape of the last sign she'd made, her hands suspended mid-air before falling slowly back to her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't move. The waiter approached with a nervous politeness, murmured something she couldn't catch. She nodded anyway. Daniel watched her trace a fingertip along the edge of her glass. Once, twice, like she was memorizing the moment before letting it dissolve. Liam's voice broke the stillness. "Did she do something wrong?" Daniel's reply was soft. "No, son. Sometimes people just don't see what's right in front of them." The boy's eyes lingered on her. "She looks quiet." Daniel didn't say what he was thinking. That quiet wasn't the same as peace. The waiter placed the check on Mara's table. She pulled out a few folded bills, eyes down, fingers trembling slightly as she counted. When she reached for her coat, one of the buttons snagged on the chair's arm. She tugged gently, then harder. The fabric pulled, twisted, refused to let go. Daniel stood before he thought about it, but Mara freed herself first, a small, efficient movement, a gesture of practiced independence. She slipped the coat on, straightened her scarf, and looked around. Not for help, but for dignity. Then her gaze caught Daniel's, only for a second. He looked away first. Outside, the rain began, thin lines against the glass, the kind that blur the city into something half-remembered. Daniel watched her reflection as she walked past the window, her head slightly bowed, steps careful but unhurried. She paused at the corner under a flickering street lamp, checked her phone, then slipped it back into her coat. No umbrella, no rush, just stillness moving through the wet night. Liam tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, can we go?" "In a minute." He was still watching the door, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she had stayed composed, or the silence she carried, not fragile but defiant, the kind of silence that didn't beg to be understood. He looked down at his son, who had started folding his napkin into small triangles. "What are you making?" "A mountain," Liam said. "But it keeps falling." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's what mountains do sometimes." Liam frowned. "Then how do they stay up?" Daniel hesitated. "They just keep standing even when it rains." When the waiter brought the bill, Daniel reached for his wallet but paused. On the far table, Mara's glass was still half full. A faint lip mark, barely visible. He found himself tracing the same circle on his own cup without realizing it. Liam yawned. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Let's go." They stepped outside into the damp air. The rain had softened, a mist brushing their jackets. Mara stood a few yards away beneath a shop awning, waiting for a rideshare that hadn't come yet. Her phone screen glowed blue against the grey of her face. Daniel adjusted Liam's hood, then turned slightly, enough to see her expression, unreadable but steady. He hesitated, then signed a small word in her direction, a hesitant motion, half memory from years ago when his late wife had volunteered at a deaf outreach centre. He signed goodnight. Her eyes lifted, surprise flickering just enough to break through the stillness. Then, cautiously, she signed back. "Thank you." Liam watched, puzzled. "Dad, what's that?" "Just saying goodnight," Daniel said. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something unspoken. Not rescue, not romance, just recognition. The kind that lives quietly between people who have both known silence too long. Back in the car, Liam drew shapes on the fogged window. "She smiled, right?" Daniel didn't answer. His reflection in the glass looked like a man halfway between two choices, to move on or to turn back. He turned the ignition. The headlights caught the street lamp, the falling rain, the awning where she stood. Mara's ride hadn't come yet. For a brief second, her eyes met his through the wet glass, just enough for him to understand that sometimes the smallest gestures echo louder than any words could. He nodded once, and though she couldn't hear the sound, she understood the meaning. The car rolled forward. The city blurred again, but somewhere between the rain and the silence, two lives had crossed paths, gently, almost accidentally, and neither would leave quite the same. The next morning began without hurry. Light slid through the blinds like it had forgotten where to fall. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and sleep. Daniel poured Liam's cereal and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. His hands remembered the movement from last night, the sign for good night. He hadn't used sign language in years, not since Claire, his late wife, had taken the course and filled their evenings with slow, deliberate gestures. He'd learned then that silence could be fluent. Liam spoke through a mouthful of milk. "Are we going to the park today?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "You're thinking again." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's allowed, isn't it?" "Not when it makes your face look like that," he laughed softly. "Like what?" "Like you're somewhere else." At the same time, across town, Mara sat by her window in a small apartment filled with plants and half-finished canvases. Morning light trembled across the floor. Her hearing aids rested on the table beside her coffee. Off. The silence was complete. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. "How was the date?" She stared at it, then typed, "Fine." He was kind, then deleted it, then nothing. Instead, she scrolled through her gallery until she found a blurry photo from the restaurant. A reflection in the glass, her own face dim beside an outline of a man she hadn't noticed then. The man at the other table. His hands had moved, slowly, carefully. She remembered. Good night. That afternoon, the rain returned, soft and repetitive. Daniel and Liam stopped by a bookstore to wait it out. Near the counter, a community board stood cluttered with flyers, art classes, piano lessons, and one familiar headline: Sign Language for Beginners, Inclusive Workshop. Liam tugged at his sleeve. Mom used to do that. Daniel nodded. She did. You still remember some? A little. Then maybe we can go. Daniel hesitated. The idea sat heavy, not unwanted, just unexpected. He tore off one of the tabs with the workshop address. The paper felt rough against his thumb. 2 evenings later, they went. The classroom was small, walls lined with posters of hand shapes. A circle of chairs filled the space, occupied by strangers learning to speak without sound. When Daniel entered, he froze. Mara sat in the far corner, sorting papers for the instructor. She looked up, surprise flashing across her face, then softening into quiet recognition. He lifted a hand, uncertain, and signed hello. Her response came swift, graceful. You came, he nodded. My son wanted to learn. She smiled slightly, just enough for the light to catch the edge of her face. That's good, Liam waved awkwardly. Hi, I'm Liam. Mara didn't hear, but she saw his lips move. Daniel leaned down, guiding his son's hands through the simple sign for nice to meet you. Mara's eyes brightened, a rare kind of gratitude that didn't need words. As the class began, Daniel found himself watching her more than the instructor. Her hands moved with the rhythm of thought, clear and unhurried. Each gesture was a sentence without sound, a language built entirely on intention. He noticed how she waited for others to catch up, how she repeated signs without irritation, how she touched her fingertips lightly to her chest when explaining thank you. Liam mimicked her, his small fingers clumsy but earnest. During a short break, Mara walked over. She wrote on her notepad and slid it across the table to Daniel. You signed clearly the other night. Did you learn before? He wrote back, my wife taught me. She used to volunteer at a deaf center. Mara paused, her pen hovering. Used to? She passed away 4 years ago. Her expression didn't change, but her pen slowed. I'm sorry, he wrote, it's all right. We're learning to listen again. In other ways. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was shared. When class ended, Liam ran ahead toward the door, spinning his umbrella like a propeller. Mara gathered her things slowly. Daniel lingered by the coat rack. He signed, Would you like a ride? She shook her head. I like walking in the rain. He nodded. So did she. Mara tilted her head. Your wife? Yes. Her reply was small, almost invisible. She taught you well. Daniel smiled faintly. Not enough. Mara's eyes softened. You remembered when it mattered. A pause. The rain began to drum on the windows again. Liam's voice echoed from the hallway. Dad, come on! Daniel turned toward the sound, then looked back. But Mara was already gone. Her umbrella, a dark shape against the dim streetlight outside. That night, after putting Liam to bed, Daniel stood by the kitchen window. His reflection overlapped with the rain. He picked up his phone, searched the word ASL, then scrolled through images of hands forming shapes, words he had forgotten how to speak. On the table beside him, Liam's drawing from earlier lay open. 3 stick figures again, but this time, 2 were signing. Daniel ran his hand over the page, his throat tightening. He whispered, almost to himself, She deserves better. And outside, beyond the glass, the rain kept tracing the same soft rhythm, a language only some learn to hear. The sky held a dull silver that morning, the kind that blurs distance, where everything feels both near and unreachable. The community centre smelled faintly of chalk and coffee. Daniel arrived early, Liam skipping at his side, their breath fogging in the cool air. Inside, Mara was already there. She stood by the whiteboard, arranging markers in a neat line. She didn't notice them at first. Her hands were moving in small, unconscious gestures, not words, but thought. When she turned, her face softened. You came again, Daniel smiled, signing back. Couldn't let my teacher down. Mara raised a brow. Half amusement, half disbelief. You learn fast. I have good motivation. He nodded toward Liam, who was attempting to balance a marker on his nose. Mara laughed, silently. but it reached her eyes. The lesson began. This time, Daniel didn't just mimic gestures. He watched her rhythm, the pauses, the breath between signs, the way her eyes anchored every meaning. The classroom filled with quiet movement, palms brushing air, fingers tracing invisible words. It was a kind of orchestra, conducted without sound. When Mara demonstrated family, her expression softened. Thumb and index fingers touched, forming a circle that closed gently, like two lives meeting halfway. Liam copied it, frowning in concentration. Daniel helped him correct it, their hands overlapping briefly. Mara watched, a flicker of memory crossing her face. She remembered her father teaching her the same sign years ago, before his illness took his sight. He used to say, "You can still see through touch." Her throat tightened. She blinked, grounding herself back to the present, to the sight of Daniel helping his son form the word. Something in that gesture, quiet, unassuming, felt like belonging. After class, most people lingered, chatting in the awkward blend of half-signed sentences and hesitant laughter. Mara began to tidy the tables. Daniel stayed behind. He waited until the room was almost empty, then signed, "Do you ever get tired of teaching?" She tilted her head. "No, but sometimes I get tired of being brave." He paused. "You don't look tired," her gaze steadied. "You don't either, but you are." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached for one of the markers and wrote on the board slowly. "Silence isn't empty. It's full of waiting." She read it, then underlined waiting. "And sometimes waiting is all we can give." Daniel looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't speaking about patience. She was talking about loss, the kind that never ends, only changes shape. That evening, Mara walked home through a drizzle. Her apartment windows glowed faintly as she approached, a row of soft yellow squares against the dark. She fed her cat, set her bag down, then opened her journal. Her handwriting was uneven, but careful. He signs like someone who listens first. She paused, tapping the pen, then added, "It's strange, being understood by someone who still has a voice." She closed the book and went to water the plants. Outside, rain pooled along the edges of the window, moving the way she imagined sound might move. Unseen, but felt. Across town, Daniel tucked Liam into bed. The boy had fallen asleep mid-sentence, one hand still forming a half-complete sign. Daniel brushed the hair from his forehead, then sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his breathing. The room was filled with the hush that follows a full day, the soft hum of the heater, the faint whisper of rain. He thought about Mara, the steadiness in her gaze, the grace in her restraint. He wondered how many times she'd been looked at without being seen. He got up, went to the living room, and opened an old photo album. Claire's handwriting covered the margins in blue ink, translations, phrases, practice notes for her ASL classes. One note read, "Silence can be heavy. Learn how to hold it." Daniel traced the words with his thumb, the same way he had once traced her pulse when she was sick. Fragile, but present. The next week, Mara invited the class to practice outside, in the city square. The noise, she said, would test their focus. Liam ran ahead to the fountain, waving both arms until Mara laughed. She showed him how to sign water, then splash. He obliged. Daniel joined her on the bench nearby. "You're good with him," she signed. "He's better with me than I deserve." Mara tilted her head. "You think too much. Occupational hazard of the quiet ones." She smiled. "We're not so different." They sat for a while, watching the world move in loud, oblivious rhythm around them. Horns, footsteps, chatter, two people in stillness, sharing something no one else could hear. A busker began to play guitar near the corner, a slow tune, the kind that leaks into the air like memory. Daniel looked at Mara. "Can you feel it?" She placed her hand on the wooden bench, palm flat. The vibration passed through the grain, soft but steady. "Yes," she signed. "Like heartbeat, not sound, feeling," he nodded. "That's enough." For a moment, she closed her eyes, just listening with her skin. When she opened them again, her gaze caught his. Something unspoken passing between them. Fragile, but real. Not affection, not longing. Recognition. The kind that makes strangers remember they were once the same. Later, As they packed up, Mara noticed a small sketchbook had fallen from Daniel's bag. It opened on a rough pencil drawing, Liam's clearly, of 3 people holding hands, 2 adults, 1 child, all signing. She held it a moment longer than she meant to. When she returned it, her hands brushed his. A brief, almost accidental contact, but it lingered, quiet as breath. That night, Mara dreamed of a restaurant again. The same one, same table, but this time no one left. The room was full of hands moving in air, and every gesture made sound she couldn't quite hear. Not music, not words, just warmth. She woke before dawn, heartbeat uneven. Outside, the city was still. She sat up, opened her notebook, and wrote, "I'm not waiting anymore. I'm listening." The air that week felt heavy, as if rain had forgotten to fall. At the community centre, the hallway lights flickered in quiet protest, their hum too soft for most to notice. Mara sat at the front desk, sorting lesson materials. Her hands moved slower than usual. The space between each gesture had widened, a rhythm offbeat. Daniel noticed it the moment he walked in. Liam ran ahead, waving both arms. "We brought snacks." Mara smiled faintly, nodding, then turned to Daniel. Her eyes looked tired. "You okay?" he signed. "Just a long day," she replied. Her movements were small, almost folded into themselves. He didn't push. He had learned by now that silence can be both a wall and a refuge. Class began. Mara moved through the motions, greetings, drills, review. But her timing faltered. She missed a cue, hesitated mid-sign, shook her head as if to clear fog. Daniel watched. Her composure, usually unshakable, seemed thinner tonight. During a break, she stepped outside for air. The evening was grey, a low wind brushing against the windows. Daniel followed a few minutes later, stopping a few feet away. She didn't turn around, but she signed without looking. "You shouldn't worry so much." He smiled softly. "I don't know how to stop. That sounds exhausting." "It is." Her hands paused mid-air. "I had an appointment this morning." She signed slowly. "The doctor said my hearing is declining further." He froze. She looked out toward the streetlights. The aids won't help much longer. The light trembled across her face, revealing nothing but calm, a fragile kind. Daniel didn't sign back right away. He just watched the wind lift strands of her hair, the world moving noiselessly around her. Finally, he signed, "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You're not afraid." She hesitated. "Then I'm tired of pretending I'm not." He nodded. That he understood completely. Inside, Liam sat drawing at the back table, oblivious to the wait outside. He had drawn 2 hands touching, one larger, one small, surrounded by a storm of scribbled lines. When Daniel and Mara returned, he looked up and grinned. "I made thunder hands." Mara tilted her head, confused but charmed. Daniel translated, signing slowly. "Thunder hands." Her eyes warmed. "That's a good kind of storm." The class ended early. Daniel helped stack chairs while Mara packed the books. He noticed her fumbling with one of the clips on her hearing aid, the tiny device catching against her hair. Without speaking, he stepped forward, gently fixing it for her. His movements were careful, respectful. She didn't pull away. When he was done, she looked up, eyes searching his face. He signed, "Better. For now. For now's enough." They walked out together. The air had turned cold. The sky pressed low, the colour of wet paper. Liam ran ahead toward the car, kicking through leaves. Mara lingered near the curb. "You don't have to walk me," she said aloud, her voice soft, slightly off-pitch, the way people speak when they can't fully hear themselves. Daniel didn't correct her. He just smiled, then signed, "I know," she sighed. "I used to love music." He signed, "You still can." She shook her head. "Not the same," he hesitated, then reached for his phone, typed something, and held it out. Maybe not sound, but maybe rhythm. Her eyes softened. She tapped the phone, then looked up at him. "You really listen, don't you?" He shrugged. "Only when words stop working." The next morning, rain finally came, hard, unrelenting. Daniel woke early, made breakfast, packed Liam's lunch. On the table sat a flyer from the community centre. Deaf Culture Awareness Night, hosted by Mara Singh. He smiled faintly. She hadn't mentioned it. That evening, he and Liam arrived early, helping set up chairs and lights. Mara entered later, carrying a projector bag. Her movements brisk but composed. She saw them, hesitated, then signed. "You came?" "Of course." Liam waved both hands in the sign for applause. She laughed, a silent, radiant moment. As the event began, Mara stood before a small audience. Her interpreter sat beside her, voicing her signs in calm rhythm. She spoke about silence, not as absence, but as texture. How sound can live in vibration, in movement, in shared gaze. Daniel watched her, not as a man in awe, but as someone quietly grateful to witness courage that didn't announce itself. When she signed the word change, she hesitated, fingers trembling for just a second, then continued, steady again. Liam leaned against Daniel's arm. "She's like Mom," he whispered. Daniel blinked, throat tightening. "Yeah," he said softly, "she is." After the talk, as people mingled, Daniel found her near the back, packing her things in silence. "You did well," he signed. She smiled faintly. "I forgot half my notes. No one noticed." "You did, only because I was watching." Her eyes lingered on him for a beat too long. Then she looked away, exhaling through her nose. Half a laugh, half surrender. She signed. "You always find me when I'm trying not to be found." He shrugged. "Maybe I just look where everyone else doesn't." For a moment she didn't move. Then she reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve. A small, deliberate contact. Her sign followed. "Thank you." For listening, he shook his head. For showing me how outside the rain had stopped. The world smelled of wet earth and electricity. Liam skipped ahead, puddle to puddle, his laughter echoing faintly behind them. Daniel and Mara walked side by side, not touching, not speaking, just moving at the same pace. The city lights reflected off the puddles like broken mirrors, their steps aligning quietly. When they reached the corner, she turned to him. "You don't owe me anything." She signed. "Neither do you," he replied. "Then why are you still here?" He hesitated, then signed, because silence feels different when you're in it. Her hands stilled. A soft breath left her lips. She looked away, smiling without sound. The kind of smile that isn't about joy, but understanding. Then quietly, she signed. "See you next class." He nodded once. "See you." Back in the car, Liam buckled in and yawned. "Dad, what did she say at the end?" Daniel looked at the wet street, the reflection of lights stretching into the distance. "She said she'll see us again." Liam nodded sleepily. "Good. She makes the quiet nicer." Daniel's eyes lingered on the road. "Yeah," he whispered. "She does." Morning came quietly, the kind of stillness before winter takes hold. Frost lined the edges of the community centre windows, catching early light like dusted glass. Inside, the sign language class was half full. The heater hummed softly. Mara stood at the board, explaining rhythm in signing, pauses, emphasis, the weight of stillness between gestures. Her hands moved in clean arcs, confident, deliberate. Yet every few moments, she paused, not for effect, but to ground herself against a faint spinning in her head. Daniel, sitting in the back beside Liam, noticed. He'd learned her patterns. The small breaths, the touch of fingers to temple, the half-second drift of focus. It wasn't fatigue this time. It was something deeper. After class, she lingered. Students left in clusters, laughter filling the hallway, muffled but vivid. When the last door closed, the silence settled, thick and close. Daniel approached. "You didn't hear Liam call your name," he said softly. She blinked, then signed. "No, I didn't." He hesitated. "How bad is it now?" Her eyes lowered. "This morning I couldn't hear the kettle, not even the click." Her hands trembled slightly mid-sign. "It's almost gone, Daniel." For a moment he didn't move. Then he reached for the marker she had dropped and set it gently back on the table. "Can I help?" She smiled faintly. "You already are." That evening he drove her home, the first time she'd allowed it. The world outside was still wet from last night's snow, streets shimmering under orange lamps. Inside the car, Liam hummed softly, tracing fog shapes on the window. Mara watched him from the passenger seat, a distant warmth in her eyes. She signed to Daniel. "He's calm, like you," he replied without looking from the road. He wasn't. Not before. She turned to him, curious. He signed with one hand, slow and deliberate. His mother died 2 years ago. He stopped speaking for months. Mara's expression softened. And now he talks when it matters. They shared a silence, not empty, but full of things neither had said yet. Her apartment was small, neat, books in careful stacks, plants near the window, leaves turning toward what light remained. She invited them in. Tea first, then small talk through gesture and glance. Liam explored the shelves, fascinated by the rows of tactile alphabet cards. He picked one up and asked, "What's this one mean?" Mara crouched beside him, tracing his hand into the shape of A. She smiled. "It's how we begin things." Daniel watched her, the way she knelt to meet a child's eye level, the steadiness in her touch. Something in him loosened quietly. Later, after Liam had fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel found Mara standing near the window. The city stretched beyond. Soft lights, muted traffic, the kind of view that makes sound feel optional. She turned to him. "You don't have to stay," he signed. "I know." Her hands lingered mid-air, unsure whether to speak again. Then she wrote something instead, scribbled on a small notepad. "I'm not ready to lose everything again." He read it, then picked up her pen and added beneath, "Maybe it's not loss. Maybe it's a translation." Her gaze met his, and something flickered there. Not hope exactly, but recognition. Weeks passed. Her hearing faded completely. Daniel began arriving early to help organize the classroom. He learned the subtle things. How to catch her attention with a light tap instead of a call. How to face her when speaking. How to let silence finish sentences. Liam, too, adapted. He started signing more fluidly, faster each day. Sometimes, he'd sign good morning with both hands and grin when Mara returned it. The three of them formed a quiet rhythm, one made of movement, not sound. But not everyone adjusted as easily. One evening, as Mara led a community workshop, a man in the back muttered, unaware she could still read lips. "She's deaf now. How's she supposed to teach?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped forward before she could, but Mara lifted a hand, stopping him. She turned toward the man and signed clearly, slowly, her interpreter voicing beside her, "I don't need to hear to make others listen." The room stilled. For the rest of the session, her hands moved with a calm authority that needed no volume. Afterward, Daniel helped her pack up. He didn't mention the moment, just handed her coat silently. She looked at him, gratitude flickering in her eyes. He signed, "You didn't need me." "No," she signed back, "but you were there anyway." Outside, snow began to fall, slow, soft flakes catching in her hair. Liam stretched out his tongue, laughing quietly. Mara stood beside Daniel, watching him. "He's not afraid of quiet anymore," she signed. "Neither am I." Her breath clouded the air. "That makes two of us." Back at home, Daniel tucked Liam into bed. As he closed the door, he noticed a folded paper sticking out of Liam's backpack. A drawing. Two figures stood beneath falling snow, hands almost touching. Above them, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Even quiet things can talk." Daniel stared at it for a long time, then turned off the light. The next week, Mara invited him to a performance, a deaf theatre group using sign and light instead of dialogue. The room was dim, the stage glowed in soft pulses, hands moved in fluid choreography, bursts of motion that looked like conversation made visible. Daniel felt the rhythm more than he understood it. At one point, Mara reached over, her hand brushing his wrist, guiding it against the small vibrations through the seat. He realized then, this was what she had meant. Sound could disappear, but meaning didn't. After the show, they walked through the empty street. Neon signs hummed faintly above them. Mara signed, "Do you ever miss sound?" He thought for a long moment. Then, sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would. Why not? Because silence started sounding like someone I care about. Her breath caught. Almost a laugh, almost not. Then she signed, "You're learning too fast." He smiled. "Good teacher." Later, in the stillness of her doorway, she hesitated before unlocking it. The hallway light flickered above them. She turned to him. "What happens when everything goes dark too?" He didn't answer with words. He reached out and placed her hand over his chest. His heart, steady, deliberate, present. "Then I'll remind you where the rhythm lives." He signed with his free hand. She stood there, motionless, then nodded once. A small, trembling gesture that meant everything. That night, as he drove home, snow fell harder. Liam slept in the back seat, his hands twitching faintly in dreams, as if still signing. At a red light, Daniel glanced out the window, catching his own reflection. There was no music in the car, no noise at all. But he realized he wasn't listening for it anymore. Silence had changed shape. It wasn't emptiness, it was presence, the kind that asks nothing, yet fills everything. The morning began without warning. Mara woke to a stillness deeper than silence. No hum of the radiator, no faint rush of wind beyond the glass. The world had stopped speaking. For a long time, she lay there, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as dawn crept in. She turned her head toward the clock. The hands moved, she could see them, but she heard nothing. Her breath came fast, uneven. She reached for her hearing aids, pressed them in, tapped twice. Nothing. She sat upright, light catching on her trembling fingers. Even her own heartbeat seemed gone. The silence wasn't peace, it was erasure. By noon, she had walked 3 blocks without realizing where she was going. The streets pulsed with invisible sound. Cars, footsteps, conversations. She saw mouths move, birds scatter, a child cry, but none of it reached her. At the corner cafe, she saw Daniel inside with Liam, both of them laughing at something on a napkin. For a moment, she froze at the window. Her reflection overlapped theirs, a quiet ghost between them. Then Liam noticed her. He waved. Daniel turned, eyes softening when he saw her face. He stood immediately, walking outside. Her lips trembled. She signed, "It's gone. All of it." He looked at her, truly looked, and nodded once. No shock, no pity. Just presence. He signed, "Then we start from here." Inside, the cafe buzzed with sound she couldn't feel. Daniel ordered by pointing. Liam drew in his sketchbook. When the drinks arrived, Mara wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the faint warmth. Her world had narrowed to texture, warmth, vibration, light. Daniel placed his hand on the table, palm up. She hesitated, then laid hers on top. He signed with his other hand. "Close your eyes." She did. He tapped the table once, gently. The vibration carried through her fingertips. He tapped again, slower. Then 3 quick pulses. When she opened her eyes, he signed, "That's how I'll talk to you, if I have to." Her breath caught. A small sound escaped. Not voice, but exhale. "You're not afraid of this," she signed. "No," he replied, "because you're still here." Days blurred into something quieter, smaller. Mara stopped teaching for a while. Her students left notes and video messages. She watched their hands move, but the absence behind them pressed hard. Daniel checked in daily, not out of duty, but rhythm. He brought soup, batteries, once even a plant that listens to light. Liam drew for her, always the same image. 2 people talking in shapes instead of sounds. She began to answer. Again, not in speech, not yet, but with gestures of living, opening the blinds, lighting candles, setting tea for 2 even when only 1 came. One afternoon, Daniel arrived to find her sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers. Old lesson plans, music notes from her childhood, half-finished poems written in careful loops. She looked up. "I used to write lyrics," she signed. "I can't remember how they sounded." Daniel knelt beside her, scanning the lines. He pointed to one. "The quiet always had its own song." "That's still true," he signed, "but I can't hear it." He paused, then reached for a pencil. He drew a slow circle on her palm. Once, twice. Steady. Rhythmic. She watched, then signed. "What's that?" "The song," he replied. "You just feel it now." Her eyes filled, but not with sorrow. Something deeper, rawer. She lifted her hand, drew the same circle on his wrist. That winter, she returned to class, not as teacher, but as presence. She stood before her students, interpreter at her side, hands poised mid-air. Then, slowly, she began to sign a poem. No voice. Just movement. Each gesture carried cadence. Short, long, pause. Her body became rhythm itself. Daniel and Liam watched from the back row. He noticed how the students leaned forward, breath held, not to hear her, but to understand her. When she finished, no one clapped. Instead, everyone raised both hands, shaking them silently, the sign for applause. Her eyes shone, light trembling at their corners. Later, Daniel found her in the hallway, coat draped over her arm. He signed, "You changed the room. I just spoke without sound." "That's the point," he replied. She tilted her head. "You really believe silence can speak? You made it sing." For the first time, she laughed. Not loud, not audible, but visible. A breath through her whole being. That night, they walked home together through the snow. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement. Their footprints formed parallel paths. At her building, she stopped him before the door. She signed, "Do you ever miss who you were before?" he thought, then signed, "Only when I forget what I've learned since. And me. You taught me silence isn't the end of anything." Her eyes softened. "Then what is it?" He hesitated. Then, "It's where everything begins again." Inside, they shared tea without words. Liam slept on the couch, hand resting against his sketchbook. Mara watched him for a long time, then turned to Daniel. She signed, "He'll be fine. He already is," he replied. She looked at him, steady, searching. "And you?" He smiled faintly, still learning the language. Her fingers brushed against his hand. A slow, deliberate contact, not as comfort, but as confirmation. When he left that night, she followed him to the door. Snow drifted past the window, soft, endless, soundless. She signed one last thing before he stepped out. "If I forget the sound of my own voice someday, will you remember it for me?" He paused in the doorway, then signed, "No." Her brows furrowed. He added, "Because I'll remember the way your silence felt instead." She exhaled, a single breath that carried 1,000 unsaid things, then nodded once, and closed the door, softly. In the street, Daniel stood for a while. Snow collected on his shoulders. A passing bus sent waves of sound he couldn't share. But he didn't need to. Somewhere above, behind that quiet window, a light flickered. Steady, persistent, alive. And for the first time, he understood what she'd meant all along. Absence wasn't the opposite of sound. It was its echo, returning, reshaped, remembered. Spring came late that year. The city thawed in hesitant rhythm, puddles forming, branches shivering with almost buds. The world seemed to relearn sound, even as Mara no longer could. She moved slower now, not from weariness, but from precision. Every gesture had intention, every movement carried care. Her silence no longer felt like absence. It had become its own kind of music. At the community centre, a new banner hung above the hall. Inclusive Voices, a night of shared stories. Mara had organised it, with Daniel quietly behind the scenes, fixing lights, arranging chairs, letting her lead. Tonight, she wouldn't be teaching. She'd be telling a story, not with words, not even signs alone, but through movement and light. The hall filled gradually. Parents, students, neighbours, even those who once doubted her came. Liam stood near the front, his sketchbook in hand, eyes bright. Daniel watched from the side, one hand resting on the back of a chair. The lights dimmed. On stage, Mara stood beneath a soft circle of light. No interpreter, no sound, only her. Then she began. Her hands shaped air into memory. A girl at a cafe, a man with kind eyes, a boy drawing thunder in silence. She showed loneliness through stillness. She showed kindness through pause. She showed love, not romantic, not spoken, through the way two hands nearly touched and didn't. Every motion carried breath. Every pause was a heartbeat. By the end, no one moved. The lights dimmed to near darkness, and from the audience, without cue, a wave of hands rose, trembling, shimmering applause. Mara stood in that glow of silent celebration, her eyes shining. Afterward, Daniel waited near the back door. When she emerged, the crowd still lingered, speaking in half whispers. He signed, "You did it." She replied, "We did." "No," he said, smiling. "You did. I just made sure the lights stayed on." She laughed, a soundless laugh, full-bodied and free. Then, for the first time, she took his hand fully. Fingers interlacing with quiet certainty, they walked outside. Evening air, crisp and damp. The streetlights flickered against puddles like tiny fires. Liam ran ahead, splashing through water. "Dad, she was amazing!" Mara looked at Daniel, eyebrows raised. He signed. He said, "You were amazing." She knelt and signed back to Liam, "Thank you for watching the quiet parts." He grinned. "Those were my favorite." Later, they stopped by the river. It was late, the kind of hour where the world exhales. Mara leaned against the railing, feeling the hum of the city through the metal. Daniel stood beside her, hands in pockets. "Do you miss sound?" He signed. She took her time. Then, "No, not anymore." He nodded. "I don't either. You still can hear it, though." "Yeah." He paused, "But I think I started listening differently." "How so?" "Before, sound filled the space. Now, silence shapes it." Her lips curved. Not a smile exactly, but something quieter. They stayed like that for a while. A ferry passed in the distance, its lights gliding over the water like slow fireflies. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. She let it. Then she reached into her pocket and handed him a folded note. He opened it. Inside, her handwriting. Careful, deliberate. "Silence didn't take sound from me. It gave meaning to everything that remained." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You're going to be okay," he signed. She nodded once. "I already am." When he dropped her home that night, she didn't go straight inside. She turned at her door, hand resting on the frame, eyes on him. "You ever think about how it started?" She signed. He smiled. "You mean, the cafe?" "Yes. You signed first." "You deserved better," he replied. Her fingers hesitated mid-air. Then she signed slowly, "I found better." He looked down, breath catching in his chest. "What do you mean?" She touched her fingers to her chin, then moved them outward. "Thank you." Then another sign, smaller, gentler. "Stay." He did. Not forever, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to walk her to class on hard days. Enough to help Liam finish homework when she couldn't hear him ask for help. Enough to sit beside her on quiet, mornings when the world felt heavy, saying nothing at all. Their lives didn't fuse. They coexisted. Two silences that had learned to echo, not collide. Months passed. Summer arrived. Loud, bright, unstoppable. One afternoon, Daniel found her in the park, sitting on the grass, while Liam taught a friend how to sign. She looked peaceful, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. He watched for a while, not wanting to disturb the stillness. Then he sat beside her. She opened her eyes, smiled, and signed. "The world's loud today. You can tell?" "I can feel it." He chuckled. "Guess that's enough." "It is." They sat together as the wind carried laughter, rustling leaves, the low rumble of a distant train. All of it invisible to her, yet somehow understood. As evening fell, they walked home. Liam skipped ahead, signing jokes neither of them fully caught, but both enjoyed. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Mara slowed, turning to Daniel. "You remember what you said? At the cafe? That I deserved better?" He nodded. "You were wrong," she signed softly. "I deserved different, and that's what I got." He watched her hands move, precise, graceful, complete. For a moment, he didn't reply. Then, different can be better. Sometimes, she signed, it's enough that it's true. They reached her building. She opened the door, then looked back. A quiet pause, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. He raised a hand, the sign for see you. She returned it, smaller, slower, and smiled. Then the door closed. The night deepened, and from somewhere within that silence, a rhythm began again. Not sound, not light, but something in between. In a world built on noise, they found meaning in what wasn't said. Silence didn't separate them. It revealed them. Sometimes the truest connection isn't spoken, nor heard, but understood, in the way one hand reaches for another, and both choose to stay, even when the world keeps talking.